gonna call this meeting to order. Entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Jeremy first. Okay. Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Ray and Doug. Okay. Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, motion carries. We're going to move, we have 4 public hearings tonight. We're going to move into the first one. I'll turn that over to you, Ben. Right?
Okay, we have first item is a preliminary plat application. We'll be taking, pull up the line here from the map. We will be taking 2 existing unplatted lots, which are highlighted in yellow on the screen there, and making them into 3. So the one here with the house on it would basically stay at the same boundaries. There would be another lot created around this building, and then the third lot would be down here.
The lot line on the west one does shift a little bit to the west. This lot line here does shift a little bit to the west to make that third lot around that other building.
So all of the lots, the related application here tonight that will come up next is a rezoning. And if that rezoning were to occur, which is to take this lot and this lot that would be created and make those R1C, then all the lot sizes would meet the minimum requirements in the ordinance. So those would be met in this. This is the zoning districts right now, so you've got R1C to the west. And that's what this one is proposing. So unless that rezoning were to occur, then the lot sizes would not meet the minimum standard for the current B3 zone. So they are tied together, and as I noted in the comments section of the staff report, you might want to make any approval of this preliminary plat contingent on the rezoning also being approved. Outside of that, there's some stormwater and engineering comments that I'll leave to Greg.
In terms of the stormwater, if you recall, this is the area where Community Services recently built their new building over there. That was taken into account in terms of what was installed over there. So the stormwater is basically taken care of through those documents that were prepared earlier this year.
This, of course, is the proposed plan. Lots 1, 2,
We have affidavit of publication.
yes.
I assume, okay. This time, I'd like to hear from the applicant, describe their proposal. Maybe Mr. Lemire,
Yeah,
do you want to talk about this application, or?
well, yeah,
I
my
need
surveyor was
your
supposed to be
address.
there. He could have told you more about what's going on out there with the property. Okay. But it's gonna be sold to the school.
Okay. And what's your address, Earl? We're supposed to have that for on record when anyone speaks.
Yeah. I don't know offhand.
Is it the same address that's on
On the application.
14750 Riverwood Drive?
Yeah.
We need your home address.
No, I'm on Smith.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we need your home address.
I'll get that for you before the meeting goes.
Okay. Okay, we can receive comments from the public. You can spend up to 2 minutes, and it should be germane and concise. It shouldn't exceed more than 2 times with a maximum of 2 appearances. So if you do decide to speak, you need to come up to the podium, give your name and address. We'll take that down and then we'll allow your time. Does anyone in the audience wish to speak for or against this project or proposal?
Robin Hensel, 807 First Street Southeast. I'd just like to ask Mr. Lemire what the property is being sold to the school for. Is it in conjunction with the ball fields, or what are they gonna do with it?
Well,
It has to be germane here. I don't think that really is the issue right now. Right now, we're just going through the public hearing.
Well, this is part of the rezoning, right?
Well, once it's rezoned, he can do whatever he wants with it, you know, if it goes through,
Right, well, you guys just asked him.
okay? Well,
Purchase price doesn't mean anything. It has no relevance to this.
no relevance at all.
Well, think of the properties in lieu of being sold or with a potential rezoning. I think the public has a right to know what its intended use is going to be.
I guess for clarification, currently all the parcels are zoned B3. Mr. Lemire is requesting to rezone these two here to R1C, which actually is a reduction in what could be done out there. So they're actually going backwards in terms of what can be done, as opposed to business. They're looking to rezone it to residential.
And the other part would just remain a B3.
The other part would remain a B3.
Okay.
So part of it is going to be used for school purposes and rezoned to a different zoning, right?
No, it's
Nope, it's staying
remaining the
as current
same.
zoning, the area that the school is using.
There's a building on it, so you can't have like a ball.
This is the
field or
current
something
zone.
on it.
That's a new building that was put up there currently, already.
Yeah.
It's there. That's the lot that the school will be purchasing.
Right here.
Okay. Well, just a public hearing, I'm
Right.
asking.
No, that's the one that the other building, there are 2 buildings out there, they walk to the school. So that's staying B3, it's not
Is there
going
another
anywhere.
building from the school gonna be built there? or-
The CC is using it, it's been in the record, correct?
Right.
Because they no longer use the convent.
Okay, so
That's
the
what's
proposed
there.
use of the land is going to be what? If you're wanting to rezone, what is,
B3, which it currently is. And the other 2 are gonna go into R1C, which is residential
Residential.
country homes.
okay, and the split is the reason for the rezoning coming up. The splitting
The
of the,
split and the rezoning are 2 independent things. I mean, they're related, but they're 2 independent applications. You wouldn't have to rezone it to split it.
oh,
If you just wanted to split it up into B3 zone lots, you could do so. Except that it wouldn't meet the minimum size requirements.
okay.
In the
thank
B3
you.
district, the minimum lot sizes are allowed.
Does anybody else want to speak?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I did have one individual, Mr. Watuki, did come in, that did indicate that he was in favor of the rezoning as well, and the plan. And Mr. Watuki lives
Just west?
just west, right over now.
That would be Joe.
Yes.
Okay, at this time, I'll close the public hearing at 6:39. It's open to discussion amongst the board here.
I guess first thing I have for concern, Mr. Chair, is we're gonna go to R1C. On that lot, there's a building 30 by 50, which is gonna be non-conforming because that's not a residence, correct? So we're gonna have a non-conforming building structure on a residential lot, correct? Or is that also a home there?
I'll have to check, I don't know.
So the other one says a house, the other one just says a building, so if that's just a building, not a residence, we're gonna have a exterior building on a, as a primary, on a primary structure on the lot.
So I'll have to check to see what
That
that
conforming, non-conformity right off the get-go.
currently is.
Earl, can I ask you a question? The building just east of your house, is that like a garage or?
Yeah, I just got it for storage and stuff.
Okay. So now we know what that building is. Anyone else have anything? I think Jeremy has a valid point. Go ahead.
That question. In spite of the 30 by 50 building on the proposed lot 2, is there sufficient space for a dwelling to be added to that garage and still conform to R1C?
That's a full-size lot.
I understand it's a full-size lot. What I'm asking is if there, I know the building is, you have a building there, and is there adequate space with setbacks and side yard limitations to allow construction beyond what is already there?
Yes.
There is.
Yeah. If you look on there, you can kind of see the setback requirements. This is it right in through here. And so that would allow ample room for that, a building to be built there as a home.
A residence. Conforming to R1C.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's 101 feet wide.
The whole lot's
Yeah,
101.
okay.
You gotta
Yeah.
Take the 30 out, so you're down to 70, and you got a 30-foot building, so it's, you're down to less than 40 feet, so there you make homes.
Still behind it.
Well, you could
Right.
Build-
You get
build
down
to the
to
south.
on the backside.
Has your mother ever have her carry a phone?
30 by 50 converted to a house.
Right.
I gotta know what my address at my house is.
Okay, any other questions? You kind of took care of what I was getting at, so I don't have to say anything.
Good.
No other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I would move for the approval of, I would move for the approval of the plat application pending the approval of rezoning. Are we on the right track there, Ben?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was it.
Motion made. Is there a second?
I will second.
Almost died. Okay, motion made and seconded by and do anyone want to discuss this further?
So, we're gonna make it a non-conformity if we approve the rezone.
What would have to happen is they would have to apply for a variance, otherwise it would have to be either converted to a dwelling or dwelling on it or something.
Or make it a larger lot.
And combine it with lot one. That
Lot
would be the,
three.
that would be the other alternative.
Or one, and then split it later.
So what you're suggesting is combine them now if we go forward with this?
Well, I am in favor of making a non-conformity right off the get-go,
Right.
and have to combine with either one or three to make it conform.
So the building by itself on the lot would be non-conforming?
Correct.
Right, it's not a primary structure, it's an exterior building.
It's cold in place, you just can't build a garage on a lot in town. It has to have a residence. So, and Jeremy's saying it would be a non-conforming lot if located, split up, which, not too sure about.
What could happen in that scenario is if it was just combined into one lot at this point, I would have to double check, but I believe Mr. Lemire can come back in, do that as a waiver of subdivision, we'll just split it later on, provided that there was a house put on that lot, and that was like one. So that wouldn't require a public hearing. To get the survey done.
As long as it's zoned R1C.
As long as it's all legal.
Okay. Can we put that into the motion?
I've got the motion on the table, so you want to get that first.
Okay. We have to,
Or else the people have to amend it.
14683.
Okay, what's the rest of it? Or what's the-
Smith.
Okay,
Thank you.
146.
got it there?
Yep, thank you.
Ray, would you like to amend your
What
motion
was the amendment?
that we keep only two numbered up there, keep them as one lot? And then later on, if he was to rebuild, you'd have to fight him.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah, okay.
I tend to agree with that. So what we would, but that's not the plat that he's asking for. Wouldn't he have to come back and with the new plan? Or can we just,
Well, they just want to know my.
or can we just say, no, we don't like your plat, you're gonna have lots 1 and 2. Well, we're gonna combine 1 and 2 and
We could
we'll
say that-
rezone 3 or whatever we're doing.
we could say that the preliminary plat is approved contingent upon lots 1 and 2 being combined.
When it comes back for final plat, it has to show that. It's just like any other condition on the plat. In my opinion, you could do that now. You could do that on the fly, so to speak.
Okay.
Rather than having a non-conforming building. Very well. I would agree to that.
What you done?
How can it be, excuse me, how can it be a non-conforming building on a lot?
You can't have, you're asking the lot to be a dwelling lot, and you're putting a garage, you already have a garage on it.
Yeah.
And the zoning laws say that you may not have just a garage on a livable lot.
Is that out in the country? Or just in
Yes,
the
that's
city?
in the city of Little Falls.
Yeah, but that
You
was-
are in the city of Little Falls.
I know, but that was on there before it come into the city.
True, so with it being as B3, it's okay, but when we're rezoning to an R1C, we can't create a non-conforming.
What you could do later, Earl, is apply to separate the two lots if you were ever gonna sell like half of it off. And at that time, it would have to be either a variance for having that on there, or a residence would have to be put on that property.
So it looks like you got septic manholes on it, so you must have a septic in that building.
I got everything in there.
So basically, it's got living quarters in it.
That's my working.
Well, that's what we need. We need living quarters there in order to make it a conforming lot, because it's gotta have a primary structure so somebody could live there.
Well, if I-
And that's what I'm saying, it's got septic on both lots the way it looks. So you must have two different septic systems, because you got the manholes in the back on one, and you got manholes on two.
If I ever want to sell it, I can make it a living quarter.
So at that time,
Yeah.
if you converted it to living quarters,
Pardon?
if you converted it to living quarters, at that
Yeah, if I
time,
ever want to sell it.
yes, and you could come back in and you wouldn't have to go through a public hearing again. I'm almost sure, I will double check, but
As long as it's private.
yeah, you would just come through as an administrative waiver of subdivision, you provide us the survey, the legal description, and then you can do that.
Are we ready for a vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Now we move on to the second public hearing, concerning the same issue, except we're dealing with B3 to an R1C on part of that.
Need your address? together?
So,
Do you need
at
your
this time,
address?
I open up the public hearing, 6:49, and I turn it over to Ben again.
Okay, same thing, like I said, the proposed, the current zoning right now is B3 for both of these lots. They want to make this lot and this lot R1C, just like the land to the west. This area is identified for, in the comprehensive plan as some residential, some business park. Basically, areas to the north along Smith Avenue are identified for residential uses. So that would be consistent with that comprehensive plan to have these two lots in the R1C. The rest of this would remain B13 or B3 like it is now. So I don't see it as spot zoning or anything like that. I think it is reasonably consistent with the comprehensive plan. And like I said before, it would be, for those lots to be the size that they are, it either has to be rezoned to this R1C or some other residential district. Can't be done.
And you have an affidavit of publication for that?
Yes.
Okay. Where's their own? I guess the applicant doesn't want to describe his proposal, but it's pretty much self-explanatory by Ben. And at this time, we'll open it up to the audience. The same conditions are applying here. Have up until 2 minutes, and you can come back twice if you need to. Does anyone want to speak about this? For or against? Hearing nothing, this public hearing is closed at 6:51. And it's open up to discussion on the floor. Here.
To start discussion, I'll open with a motion that we approve the rezoning request, that the, what are we, lots 1,
1 and 2,
1 and 2,
proposed 1 and 2 lots.
proposed lots 1 and 2 be zoned R1C. And the remainder of the proposed plat to remain B3.
Motion made,
Second.
second by Jeremy. Any discussion?
I have a question. What is B3? What are you zoned for B3?
That's business. Zone for business.
Okay,
That's his current zoning right now, is B3. So he's not changing that.
His residence and the property just to the east of his residence is combined into an R1C, which is residential country. So he just wants to switch them upper 2 lots on the north to a residential area.
and it's within the city limits?
It's in the city limits. Any other discussion?
I was just gonna say, just like the previous one, Joe Watuki did mention he was in favor of the rezoning as well.
Okay. And he's pretty much the only residential property next to this area.
There is one to the north here. We didn't hear
Okay.
anything from them. And I'm not sure, we didn't hear anything from those either.
Okay. But the information was sent out, so they had an opportunity to
Correct.
make a response. Okay,
Is that the only 2 zoning you can use for that area?
well,
Either
someone can
business
make a
or
request.
residential?
No, well, yeah, I mean, it's gonna be
That's all there-
business or residential, but
See, that's, those are the only 2.
Well, you can use anything if,
you could put anything on that, or come back and ask for industrial or anything, but
Oh, really?
right now it's B3.
And what size are they?
16,000 square feet.
For both of them?
If you're gonna speak, you do have to give a name and address.
Oh, okay, I will keep my mouth shut.
Oh, okay.
I didn't
Oh,
come here
that's
for this.
fine. That's fine. We have to keep this on record,
Yes.
okay?
So you have first and second?
We have a first and second, with no more discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We're into our third public hearing for tonight. This deals with the ordinance amendment, amending a city code, chapter 5. And I'm gonna open this public hearing at 6:54. And I'm also turning that one over to Ben. He's gonna give a presentation here.
All right, I know some of you have seen this at the informational meeting we had last week at the council meeting, work session, and then a council meeting that's out too. But for those of you that haven't, this is basically a summary of the proposed changes that we have for the sign ordinance. There's kind of two things that drove this. One is just the history of the sign ordinance in the city here and the challenges that have come up from that. And then the other thing is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that came this past summer in June regarding a case in Arizona where a city was regulating signs, and they had, not to go into too much depth, but they had basically three different distinctions within their ordinance that addressed what they called ideological signs, political signs, and temporary directional signs. And for each of those categories, they had different, they didn't really care what the message was as long as it was within that category. But they had different size limitations for each of those, different location allowances, different lengths of time that they can be up. And that got taken all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court basically said, no, you can't do it that way. And one of the takeaways that I took from that and from the discussions that have come from that case is that the court justices were saying if you have to read the sign to regulate it, then you have to have a very, very good reason that it's almost impossible to get. They call it strict scrutiny in legal terms. I won't pretend to know exactly all the ins and outs of what that means, but the bottom line is that you really can't do it if you're making those distinctions. So we wanted to make sure that as we were making these amendments that we were addressing that decision and making sure that we were in compliance with it. If you've ever followed U.S. Supreme Court decisions or really any court decisions, sometimes you end up with more questions than answers. I know a lot of the discussion that I've heard from different attorneys and city officials and that, I know that is that there's still some unanswered questions, but so we're doing our best to address what we can with that. Other than that, these 7 bullet points here are basically taken from the current ordinance language in terms of what we're trying to do with the sign ordinance. Obviously, ensuring compliance with the federal and state law in court cases. Regulating the number, location, size, type, illumination, and other physical characteristics of the sign. So you'll notice that we're not talking about the message there. Trying to prevent visual clutter in the community. Making sure that people have an effective means of communication for their First Amendment rights. There is a intent there to allow more signage in commercial and industrial areas than residential settings. Partly for that clutter reason and for other reasons. There is a provision in there to allow small signs that really don't have an impact on that clutter issue or anything else that's of public significance. And so there's certain signs that would be allowed without permit requirements or without county towards limitations. And then having fair and consistent enforcement. So in terms of exemptions, things that are not subject to the sign ordinance, this first section here is what's in the current ordinance, and we're not proposing any changes to that. So there's a state law that says you can have non-commercial signs of any size and any number a certain amount of time before and after statewide storm area elections. So that's going to stay in there, and then the city also added an additional time period in there for before and after special elections that the city might have, or that might be in this area. So no, that's not changing. Things that are still not allowed, again, no change here. Signs in the public right of way are still not allowed. They haven't been before and they are now in this proposal. And then there's a list of some other signs that you can't imitate a stop sign or a police siren or something like that. The things that would change, so things that were exempted under the current ordinance and that we're proposing to not exempt anymore, and this has mostly to do with that Supreme Court decision. Real estate signs, construction signs, you're in the picture there. Those nameplate signs that are on the sides of the building that say maybe the name of the person or the address or the name of the business. Obviously, we're reading those to regulate that and determine what they are, so we can take that out. Exemption in there for signs on mailboxes, that would come out. And be left up to the postmaster in terms of what they regulate for what can be on months. And then one of the bigger ones here is the off-premise sign that we had banned before. And this is where the garage sale issue came into play, as well as things like billboards and other signs that advertise businesses not on the same site or anything, advertise some other thing going on on the site. So those would no longer be exempt or prohibited under those changes. So something that we're proposing changing here is that all signs less than 1/2 square foot would be exempt and not counted in the ordinance. Would be, when we set up the maximum amount of signage that a person can have on the property, any signs that are less than 1/2 square foot are not counted. Basically ignored. And the reason for that is because they're small enough that they wouldn't typically cause a problem for anybody. So that's what's not there. Signs that are in the right-of-way that are approved by the governmental agency that has authority over that right-of-way, so traffic signs primarily, those would be exempt. That's the same as it is today. Changing the display surface on an existing sign, so if all you're doing is changing the name of it from one business to another, or one message to another, as long as you're not changing the size of the sign, or the height of the sign, or the location of the sign, that would still be exempt from the permit of this proposed ordinance. This is something new that we would basically say if you're on county, state, federal, or even school district property, you would be exempt from the sign ordinance. And the reason for that is in talking to attorneys, they say there's some case law and some thought out there that that's the law as it is today. It could be debated, they said. But I think rather than debating that and fighting over that, I was just make it simple and say, state property, federal properties, and that they're not subject to the city sign ordinance. In some of the districts, the business and the industrial districts, and then in the R3 district, which has multi-family housing in it, or the potential for that anyways, if the sign was a certain size or less, and it was more than 100 feet from the road, then we would just exempt it. And again, the thought there is that it's so far back from the public right-of-way and public site that it's really not going to be of any impact. So we would just exempt it. That's new. Flags, we're changing how we would address that. Right now, the regulations are you can have, at least on residential property, you can have 2 flags, or 2 signs, or 1 of each, and that's it. What we're proposing here is to separate out flags and signs from each other and say that flags have their own limits and signs have their own limits. So for flags, we're proposing that a residential property could have any one flag could be up to 40 square feet. And then in total, they could have other flags out there up to 50 square feet in total. So if you wanted to have a bunch of small 1 foot by 2 foot flags flapping around in your yard, you can do that up to 50 square feet. If you wanted to use 1 big flag and maybe 1 smaller flag, you can do that. So it gives a little bit more flexibility and still keeps some limits on things.
So if I see that one then, so if I have a flagpole and I've got a 5x8 Minnesota flag and 5x8 US flag,
That wouldn't exceed the limit.
that would exceed the limit. Okay.
You could have 2 smaller. I mean, a lot of signs are 4x6, 24 square feet. You could have 2 of those. That would pretty much use up your allowance pressure.
What about a swag that looks like a
Just wait a
flag?
minute, ma'am.
What?
We're gonna have a time for questions in a little
Oh,
bit.
I'm
here.
sorry.
So that's residential, and then in commercial and industrial right now, we don't have any limit on the number of flags that you can have. But there's no limit on size actually either. What we propose here is that you can have up to 300 square feet, and that would just be something you can do on your commercial property, turning 1 flag. There's no limit on the number of them. If you wanted to have an extra large flag, kind of like the Perkins ones that they have out there, I think that's probably 600 square feet if my research is correct. Then that would require a conditional use permit, and the reasoning for that is just because it's higher up in the air, it's larger. If it were to, pole were to fall over, or if the flag were to tear off and fall down, it's more of a hazard to people. So we have a conditional use permit, but presumably would require certain construction standards. This is a section we would add to specifically exempt signs that are on the sides of dumpsters and portable storage units or other things that are owned by companies that are in the business of waste management or portable storage. The signs on the sides of those would have to be, the ones that are carved into it or painted onto it. It's not somebody slap something up on it with some duct tape and say it's exempt. So those would be exempted. Things on personal property, example I give is like Polaris snowmobile. It says Polaris on it, that can be constituted as a sign. We're going to exempt those. And then things on gravestones and other similar use structures like that, property like that. Murals, we would treat a little bit differently than we do right now. In the current ordinance, they are allowed, but there's a setback to residential properties of 150 feet. We would get rid of that setback requirement. We would just say as long as it's on a property that's used commercially or industrially, and it's maintained by the owner and that kind of thing, it would be allowed. The current ordinance also requires that the city council approve those murals. In this case, we can take that out of it. The council would have no say. And that's just to make sure that we're not getting involved in regulating the message of a mural and saying one mural is okay, one is not. That's a proposed change. And then city-owned property, as long as it's approved by the council, it would be exempted here too. But the current ordinance does that it's limited to certain signs that advertise the city itself or anything like that. This would give the council a little bit more flexibility in that. Again, you have to be careful as a council about not regulating messages and that kind of thing. But and then any signs that are required by law. So, for instance, a handicap parking sign is required by law, or the signs that are at gas stations that talk about the flammability hazards and that kind of thing. Those are required by law. So the other significant change that we're proposing here is when permits would be required. Right now, basically, permits are required not so much in residential areas, but in business and commercial areas. They're required for almost every sign, or at least it can be interpreted that way. And so what we are trying to do here is clarify that only certain signs would require permits, but we're going to retain the overall limit on signage on the property. And so even if some signs don't require permits, they're still going to count against the limit. So what we propose is that if the highest part of the sign is 7 feet or above, or higher above the ground, or in height, then we would require a permit for it. And that's roughly in line with what a building code permit or a building code compliance is required. And if it's below 7 feet, so if you've got signs out there that say now hiring, or come buy our product, or whatever it might be, those signs wouldn't require permits, but again, they would count against the limit that they have for their property. And that's primarily being put in there for ease of administration and just, do we really need to worry about building code issues with small signs and that kind of things. They change often, businesses often want to change them frequently. We didn't want a situation where they have to come in every time. We also clarified in there that a person could come in, business could come in and ask for a sign permit that would cover multiple signs for their property. And so that would also be another way that would allow them to switch them out on a regular basis if they wanted to without having to get additional permits. But again, the building code still applies here, so if the building code requires that a sign get a permit, they still be required.
Can you describe your 7 feet in height again?
What was the reasoning?
That's the highest. If I have a 3-foot sign 3 feet high and I set it 4 feet above the ground or whatever, and I come to, is that 7 feet? Or you're talking about a sign that is 7 feet?
Well, like if it's attached to the ground somehow,
Okay,
we would measure from the ground surface to the top of the sign.
if it's on a pole or a post.
If it's on the side of a building, that would also still apply to above the ground surface. So that would be.
Okay, thank you.
So for residential districts in particular, the result of all this would be that if you had a residential property that had two or fewer dwelling units, so basically if it was a single family house or a twin home or a duplex type home, You would be allowed 8 square feet maximum for any one sign. That's the same as today's ordinance. You would be allowed 16 square feet total for your entire property, and that's an increase from the current 8 square foot limit. Maximum height of any one sign would be 4 feet, and that's where there becomes to be a difference between if it's attached to the ground or if it's attached to the side of the building. So on the ground, we're going to measure from the ground surface. If it's attached to the side of the building, we're going to measure from the bottom of the sign to the top of the sign. And that would be your maximum height. And then there's no limit on the total number of signs that you can have on the property as long as you stay under your 16 square feet. And that's a change from today's limit to 2. No matter how large or small. And then with one exception that we're going to be talking about tonight, two exceptions. They cannot be illuminated. Now, still in residential districts, but if you go up to a place, a property that has 3 or more dwelling units on it, so a small apartment or quad or whatever it may be, again, it's 8 square feet maximum for any one sign. It's the same as today. And then your overall sign limit for the entire property depends on how much road frontage you have, based on the chart there. So it goes everything up from 16 square feet to 48 square feet of maximum signage on the entire property. 4-foot maximum height again. Again, no limit on the total number of times. We have an exception in here that would allow for one sign on these kinds of properties. So again, it's just for those that have 3 or more dwelling units on it. They can have an additional sign up to 32 square feet and 8 feet in height, but it has to be within 30 feet of the right of way. So that might be something like the picture on the lower right there, where it's announcing the name of the apartment complex or whatever. Again, we can't regulate the message that's on it or not. Presumably that's one thing that it could be used for. And those signs can be externally illuminated, which basically means like the picture there again, where the lights are shining against it, not from behind it or out beside it. So that's where illumination would be involved. In the business and industrial districts, we keep the same overall limits for the property as there are now. But what we would do is we would say that every property, regardless of how narrow it is or how little road frontage it has, will get at least 50 square feet of signage. So we do have some properties that are less than, say, 25 square feet or feet wide. Some are 20 feet wide. Whatever it might be. And we were in a situation where they weren't getting very much signage allowed. So we would allow everybody to have at least 50 square feet. If you have a property, which we do obviously in a lot of parts of the city here, where they back up to a parking lot, another street or something else where they might have a rear entrance, and we have a provision in there that would allow them another 50 square feet, so they can have 50 square feet on the front. We don't actually specify that they have to put 50 in front and 50 on back, so that might be a point of discussion. And then in the industrial district, we don't really have any changes. Existing non-conforming signs would be allowed to remain. So any sign that doesn't conform to these rules, as long as it was put up lawfully, you would allow it to remain as long as it doesn't change in size and height and location and all those kind of things. They have to be kept in good repair, can't be abandoned, that kind of thing. And then we would also clarify that if we don't have sufficient records in City Hall, for whatever reason, the city didn't keep good records back then or something, then we wouldn't, obviously wouldn't have anything to go by to say that they were in compliance, or that it wasn't put up legally. So if somebody put up a sign 50 years ago and it was or wasn't supposed to get a permit or whatever, we don't have enough evidence to say yes or no on that. And we don't have any reason to go to them and say take it down because we don't have any evidence to say it's going to be illegal. So, one of the questions that I wanted to raise for discussion to make sure everybody was clear on it. The new ordinance, because we're getting rid of that off-premise distinction, so where before we said you couldn't have a sign on one property that advertises something going on a different property, or that announces something going on a different property. If we get rid of that, then it would just fall back on the size limits and the setback requirements that we have.
And then the business and industrial districts in the B3 and the I zoning districts, the maximum size of the sign is 300 square feet. So that is essentially a small billboard that somebody could now, advertise whatever they wanted to on it. It wouldn't have to be related to that property. The height maximum stays the same as what it is today, which is 30 feet. You go down to the B1 and B2 districts, in the more of the old parts of downtown, you have a 100 square foot maximum with a 15 or 20 foot height maximum in the district there. So we're not proposing any changes to those sizes or heights based on today's ordinance, but what people can put on the sign will change. And so whether that encourages people to do off-premise advertising or not, we just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. This would allow. So if we didn't like that, there's a couple options we can talk about maybe reducing the maximum size allowed, or prohibiting off-premise advertising on signs larger than 32 square feet or 64 square feet or something like that, so that it would allow for small signs like that, but not larger signs. And that was one of the things that came out of that US Supreme Court decision, was that some of the justices said, they made a point to go through and list out signs that or distinctions that they still felt were valid to make. You can't regulate the message, but we still think, at least some of them, thought it was still valid to say you can regulate differently between on-premise signs and off-premise signs. So our proposal at this point is to say we just eliminate that distinction entirely. But if we wanted to backtrack on that a little bit, we could possibly. Before I get into questions, there's a couple other changes that I wanted to highlight to you. I'm going to grab a report here. Look at these, but if you look in your report, there was a couple things that came out of the informational meeting that the city council had last week that we wanted to try and address. And so we added some language to address those things. If you look back in the section that talks about the proposed ordinance wording changes, the ones that are changed from that original informational meeting are highlighted in yellow. If you go to page 8, this is where we were trying to address the issue of people having like seasonal or holiday type signs. And lighting and that kind of thing. And so what we proposed here is that if you want to have illuminated signs, because remember we said in residential areas, actually the current ordinance says in residential areas you can't have illuminated signs, they can't be lit. We would allow for a temporary 45-day permit in any one calendar year that somebody could come in and ask for it, and then they could have lit signs for a 45-day consecutive period. It's not like you get to do it every weekend. Started out, but it would be one 45-day consecutive period. We put a limit on the brightness of those signs, so those type of lighting. We said that they had to be diffused or shielded, so it's not going to be shining directly on residential properties or properties nearby. And then we limited the speed of flashing that could occur on those. So I don't know if that's something that the city wants to get into or not, but it poses a problem when the U.S. Supreme Court is saying, you can't regulate the message, then you can't regulate the message. And so we can't have exemptions, let's say, if it says some kind of holiday message, and you need to do it. We basically have to say nobody can have them at all. And this isn't addressing the decoration. So if you've got a decoration up that doesn't say any words on it, and that kind of thing, those are still unregulated. And we don't regulate the lighting, we don't regulate the size, we don't regulate the number, and those kinds of things. But if you have something up that says some words on it, then it becomes a sign, and we have to get into that issue of whether you can do that sign or not, or different. So that's the thought there. I can take questions on that as we get to that.
How much would a permit be?
Right now, a sign permit would be just $30, but the council can set a different fee on it.
Was there, and they'd have to meet the same size limits, 16 square feet.
Right. Yep.
So if they have other signs on the property, say 7 square feet, they can only add an 8-foot holiday flashing illuminated
Are
sign.
they, yeah, it's still subject to their overall size.
Okay.
On the next page, page 10, 2 pages ahead of this, we just had a misprint there when we were requiring a permit for those 300 square foot flags, and we just wanted to clarify the requirement.
See page 9, you also had something there for succession.
Right.
That's your strategy.
Yeah, that's just, that's referencing the Minnesota state statute, and page 9, the legislature will change the numbering. Something like that. So that just covers it, so we don't automatically change it.
Page 5. Didn't address that, or maybe you did, but.
Yeah, I'm kind of going over here. That was partly intentional.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it makes sense to talk about this. So number 5 is the definition of illuminated sign. Just wanted to clarify what that was. I looked at different ordinances around the country to find that. But, trying to clear up that definition. Here are what we're trying to do. Page 15. This was just bottom of the page here. It talks about the minimum setback for signs in residential districts. They had it at 0 feet. Elsewhere in the ordinance, actually in the current ordinance, which we're not going to change, it had a setback of 5 feet from all property lines, and we wanted to keep that. So I just eliminated that. And then the other change has to do with these billboards, the potential for billboards on page 18 and 19. So what we said here is that in those B3 zoning districts and the industrial zoning districts, you can have up to 300 square feet of signage as long as you're within 100 feet of US Highways 10 or Highway 371. So that would allow for that sort of off-premise billboard type advertising that people are familiar with in those areas. It wouldn't be the the normal size billboard. We're still limiting it to 300 square feet. I think the normal or the largest billboards that you tend to see are more like 600 or 700 square feet. So we're still less than those, but that's what those would be allowed. And then that 300 square feet would also be allowed on the sides of buildings. If you wanted to put that 300 square feet, and that wouldn't have to be within 100 feet of those highways. That could be anywhere in those business B3 and the industrial zoning districts. But if you're in those zoning districts and you're more than 100 feet away from the highways, then you're limited to 150 square feet. And so if you wanted to put up a freestanding pole sign that was 150 square feet, then you could do it. So that was an attempt to sort of respect the previous city's discussions about billboards and trying to remove those. Let that clutter. And then on page 19, it talks about illuminated signs being prohibited in B1 districts. And the same language is back somewhere else in residential districts, where they say you can't have illuminated signs unless it's specifically allowed.
No.
So other than that, the rest of the changes there where it starts to be highlighted in green, those are parts of the zoning ordinance where, and that's the next public hearing, but I'll mention it now. Those are parts of the zoning ordinance that mention sign regulations and have their own sort of separate regulations for signs. And we thought it would be much more clear to just have all sign regulations in one ordinance. So that's mostly just deleting things that are redundant or confusing or conflicting possibly.
Deleting or moving them into the regular sign ordinance.
Yeah, either moving them over to that or just deleting them entirely and just going back to the sign ordinance. So those are the proposed changes.
Affidavit of publication has been made. At this time, I entertain The audience, if they want to stand up and say something, you have up to 2 minutes, and you can come back for 2 appearances if you choose so. State your name, come up to the podium, name and address, and we'll start you on the clock. Anyone want to speak?
Well, I might as well get one.
Might as well get her out there.
No, I'm not really there for this. My name is Kate Fessler, and I live at 718 2nd Street Southeast. We have a sign on the side of our garage. It used to be a business sign. Now, I didn't come prepared to talk about this, so I can't tell you exactly the square footage. But if I were to guess, I'd say 30 square feet, maybe 25. It's on the side of our garage. Would I have to remove it?
Well, a couple things we'd have to check is what zoning district you're in. And that would be the first thing we would check, because that obviously impacts how much square footage you can have on a property.
Zoning district?
Right,
We're
so if you're in a-
Residential zoning district.
Okay, well, we would check that and verify that, but if you were in a residential district, then it would be a question of whether it was grandfathered in because it was put up at a time where it was legal to
It
do
was
so.
put up in 2005.
Okay. So, I mean, on those kinds of things, I would have to talk to you individually to figure out the details of the situation.
Okay, now, there is, I know of a neighbor who has a flag they always display and a business sign, and he put up a swag. Now, do you consider that swag a flag?
I'll
A
make sure I
flag is not defined as a flag.
Yeah, we tried to clarify what we meant between a banner and a flag. So I don't know, I'd have to check what you mean exactly by swag, but it's something that kind of hangs down.
Well, it's, yeah, it moves down there and it's curved, you know. Looks like a flag because of the red, white, and blue. It has flags. It's a swag.
Yeah. So we, yeah, we did try and clarify what that definition change could be. It has to do with how many points it's anchored to. So like a flag is typically anchored on 2 points. And that becomes a flag, and then it has to do also with the, whereas a bunting or whatever might be, or a banner might be attached at 4 points, so that it's not as moving.
So those two are different,
Right.
a flag and a banner.
A flag and a banner are different, yeah. The thing that you're describing is probably going to be more like a flag, assuming it's only anchored in a couple points. But yeah, that's where it gets technical and sometimes confusing, but we're doing our best to try and clarify how we're doing
If a business is located just outside.
2 minutes are up.
Oh, I'm sorry,
You can come back though.
I don't want to.
Anyone else?
Are you going to do one? You going, Teresa? No. Okay. Robin Hensel, 807 First Street Southeast. Smart is the city that has no sign ordinance because it cannot never be challenged. That makes sense, especially given the history of this city, of the fact that the city has never had a constitutional sign ordinance, not once, or amendments, and the current one is not constitutional. That should matter to everyone. I strongly suggest the consideration of deleting the sign ordinance, the same as the Golf Advisory Board was deleted. That hadn't been properly ever functioning legally for 27 years.
Let's stick to sign ordinance, please.
Okay, the sign ordinance enforcement is all subjective, which means it's all the discretion of the zoning administrator. That's wrong and that's going to lead to trouble. That spells future lawsuit. Who would believe that the Minnesota State Legislature would allow unlimited signs on private property for almost an entire year? This next coming year, it's from January 15th till November 18th. Myself or anybody can have unlimited signs on the property line, high as you want, big as you want, as many as you want. Now, who would believe that our state legislature would actually allow that legally in any given election year, general election year? Does that devalue property? Does that cause accidents? I don't think so. Or else our legislature is really stupid. Okay? The council has used unfettered discretion more than once, including the illegal erection of the Lindbergh Lions display at the L'Auberger Park just last fall. And then they came back and got an after-the-fact conditional use variance, whatever you wanted to call it. They were granted, not only could they do that every year in the future, but they extended the time they could have it
Time's up.
for that particular
2
group.
minutes.
And I will be back.
Anyone else?
If no one else is going, I'm going again.
Okay.
I have more to say. Okay. I believe that striking the language in the current ordinance means that. That was an unconstitutional clause, that the city unconstitutionally regulated tobacco signage, which means the smoke shop up by the school has been denied their fair advertisement for their tobacco products for how many years now? That's an issue for a future lawsuit for those people, because their constitutional rights were violated, and that matters. Why did this city allow real estate and construction project signs on private property to be exempted in the current ordinance now, when the League of Minnesota Cities says in their memo about signs, be especially cautious about provisions that favor some messages over others, such as exemptions for real estate or construction signs. This city doesn't care. These committees and the city don't care about going by anything that the League of Minnesota Cities writes, obviously. Why didn't the big dog lawyers that this city paid for, lots and lots, thousands of dollars, why couldn't they get it right? Why did Paul Reavers and Jason Kabushik's advice not cut muster? Why did this current sign ordinance not pass muster? I'll tell you why. Because number one, commercial signage, commercial flags should never be given more precedence than free speech. That's what every court in this country has ever held. And this planning zoning meeting and the council is getting ready to pass another unconstitutional sign ordinance. If anything, free speech should be given more precedence. In this current proposal, what do the flags get in the commercial district? 50 square feet. What does the residential get? 40. That's wrong. Why can't this city get it? The Constitution matters. And there's more. I have more than I'll ask. It's question time.
Time's up. Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
You're welcome.
Anyone else wish to speak?
Will we be able to question later? Ask questions?
No,
This
you
is the
won't.
public input here.
This
Okay.
is public input. You had your 2 times. With hearing no one else, I close the public hearing at 7:34. At this time, it's open up to discussion amongst the planning commission. Would anyone like to speak here?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion made. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion made by Jeremy, second by Ray. Any discussion?
I don't know if I have a whole bunch of questions on this. I know that there was reluctance to change our existing ordinance, but apparently, Ben, if I understand your presentation, that these changes to our ordinance are to help us comply with the Supreme Court ruling on signages?
Yes, that was a significant part of what we were trying to do with these changes, is to make sure that, you know, and again, like I said, sometimes there's more questions raised out of that, you know, when I would listen to the different commentators on it, they would say, well, some of these are gonna have to be solved by lower courts, you know, when it gets to that stage, but yes, yeah, obviously, we're trying to comply with that court decision. And one of the comments that came out of it that stuck with me was, well, how the Supreme Court and the various lower courts are dealing with signs issues, and it seems to be changing every few years. What we thought, we understood about what they meant and what they want changes. So it's not a guarantee that everything's going to be perfect, but it's an attempt to make it better.
Have we had has the city attorney commented on these changes at all?
The city ended up hiring some outside attorneys to review
Okay.
this, and so we did have them review it.
And their comments generally?
Yep, they were generally okay with it. They had a few things that they commented on that we made some changes based on those comments. You know, I would recommend that they review it again when we get to a final version that's recommended by the city, planning commission, and before the council acts on it. But
So to the best of our knowledge at this point, if we were to pass this amendments to our existing ordinance, we would not be treading on the First Amendment.
best of our knowledge, yeah.
That would be great.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, was the motion to include the additions that Ben had in the report and stuff that was highlighted in yellow?
Whatever's been proposed right here tonight.
The proposal, yes.
Yep.
And that is the second.
And my understanding is, as far as political signs, the state, it isn't a year, it's 45 days before an election and 10 days after, right? For the state,
The state law,
yes, okay.
and I can pull it back up again.
I do have a question. A lighted Merry Christmas sign, where does that fall?
45-day permit.
If it's lighted, it would have to be that 45-day permit. If it's not lighted, then it would just be a sign like any other sign.
A lighted Santa Claus, or a lighted Christmas tree, or a lighted holiday tree, excuse me, would not fall in that. But if it has words on it, then it would fall in that category.
You know, unless the
So
words
Happy
are-
New Year,
Yeah.
Happy Halloween,
Peace,
Merry
joy.
Christmas, peace,
Bravo.
joy, fight war,
You can't regulate the message, so
if it's
it
lighted.
doesn't matter what it says. As long as, I mean, if it's under a half square foot, which is about half the size of a sheet of paper, then it's exempt.
Feel a little bit like playing Scrooge or the Grinch here with that thing.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the tricky part about this, when you can't regulate the message, which, you know, there's some very good reasons why you shouldn't be doing that. That's what it requires us to do, is either to allow more signs, so everybody can have more signage, or if you restrict us, you know, wherever you want to put it in there. But
Whenever I hear something like this, my mind automatically goes to ways around this. It's not like I'm gonna do it, but I know I can take a half-foot sign, cut it out, illuminate it, and it's gonna reflect off my garage large, the shadow. You know, is that legal? Go reflecting large words. You know what I'm saying?
people are creative like yourself.
Okay.
Or, well, I was thinking, or you take the 6-inch signs, we have a lot of people that are creative in here, and we make 45 signs out of those. We have one letter per, or we do whatever.
There is something in place prohibiting that. It becomes a sign. It becomes a sign.
It does.
Well, we talked about that and whether we should set an upper limit, and at this point we haven't. We certainly could set some kind of an